I'm Laurie Olsen, and this is the workshop on integrated TK curriculum for dual language learners. And a couple things I want to say up front. A few people were in my earlier session on strategies, and they asked, is this kind of the same? This is a sister workshop. We go into different territory, but there's some overlap. And if you're feeling like you want something totally new, it's fine with me if you feel like you want to leave. I just wanted to say that. The other thing is I think you picked up on the cues in the middle of the table with the white strips across it, that those are not materials to pick up yet across the middle. So please leave those there until we're ready to use them. So the materials you should have, though, and if you don't, let me know, you should have kind of a handout that looks like this. You should have a copy of the PowerPoint, and you have a copy of a single sheet, which is what we're actually going to work our way through. So if you don't have those, let me know, and the other materials will be handed out, or you'll be getting them from the middle as we're ready. So you don't have materials? Okie doke. So who has extra materials at their table? Can somebody hand these back to, there's a whole, okay, great. There you go, that and that together make a packet. Okay, all right, let's start. So I did want to acknowledge right up front that this work really comes from and was built by the SEAL team, the Sobrato Early Academic Language Model team. And we work pre-K through 5 now with the model. And thematic integrated units are part of our work at all grade levels, but they, of course, look different from the little ones as we build up. And so the thematic planner and those other materials we'll be working with today are specific to our work with the little ones. We centralize the needs of English learners in our work and in our curriculum, but it's a curriculum for all kids. This is not a separate thing just for English learners. This is TK curriculum done in a way that really meets the needs of English learners. So the curriculum work we're going to do as the model also draws on all of these things. It draws on the Preschool Foundations very heavily. You'll see we'll be working with the content areas of the Preschool Foundations. It draws on both the Common Core and Next Generation Science standards and the History Social Studies standards from kindergarten. And we look at all of that through the lens of what we really know about dual language learners and intentional language work. And so if you want to get a deeper picture of what that really means, here's that, that imagery that the Preschool Foundations uses to sort of talk about the key components of quality early education. And you'll see that one of the key parts of the rainbow is that learning is integrated, that the way in which language happens is connected to how kids are learning about the world, and it's connected to their cognitive development. And that's a really key understanding from early childhood. And similarly, this is the imagery from the ELA-ELD framework, the notion that everything is integrated, that language development is integrated with content knowledge, right? And that foundational skills happen in and through that kind of integrated work. And so an integrated thematic unit for us really is one of those things that does bridge across the two different systems really, really nicely in its understanding about how learning happens and how language happens. So basically, we're talking here about language-intensive, language-intentional thematic units that are going to touch and draw across all of these areas. And that's what we're going to really be working on together. In SEAL, what we say is our goal is to help kids develop very rich, fantastic, comprehensive, complex, expressive, wonderful language for talking about their world, and their world meaning personally, academically, and socio-emotionally. So we want them just using that powerful, powerful language. And it happens by creating opportunities and support for using the language orally, and we mean for our little ones in both languages, in all of their languages too. And so as we're looking at these thematic units and talking about how are we setting it up to create those opportunities and support for using language, we're going to be looking at it through this lens of language for all of those purposes. Now, I did prepare for you, and this is similar to the last workshop also, just a little bit of research about, I think I just gave away my handout, about how kids learn as background, which I'm not going to really go into with you, but I want you to know that it is in here. So I think it's in here. Should be in here. If not, just forget what I just said, and I will get it for you in the other handout. Okay. But basically, this is what we know, that language happens through relationships, through you, through their connection to you, through the modeling that you do of your language that they then pick up on, and they're turning to you as a language model. That they are engaged in naming their world, and so our responsibility has to be about creating that world for them, around them, that is rich enough and full of enough to talk about and learn about and to be curious about, so that they're going to want to use language, right? And they're going to want to use the best language. And I don't mean best in terms of status. I just mean the most descriptive, the most apt language for saying what they want to be saying. They learn through being exposed to that language and explicit vocabulary teaching, and they need a lot of opportunities to make it their own. So the key is, and this also was from the last workshop, is that we want them using language and talking. But that alone is not enough. We have to figure out how to immerse them in things to talk about, and that's where the whole planning of an integrated thematic unit really comes in. How are we going to create the stuff for them to be learning about? How are we going to think about that? How are we going to shape it so that they want to talk, so they have things to talk about, so there's vocabulary and a world to apply language to? So, integrated curriculum in young kids. They don't divide, this is language, this is science, this is art, right? It's all just the world, right? So they're not thinking in disciplinary ways. And so when we talk about integrated curriculum, we mean we're really integrating all of those different aspects. It's not just language integrated with one content area. They learn through very active engagement, and that their thought develops, their language develops. So I want you to actually spend a little time thinking about, well, what is this integrated thematic curriculum really all about? And we're going to actually do a reading. So in your packets, you will see, you might want to number your pages, but right after the rainbow, there's an article that begins, which is on integrated curriculum, and this is straight from the California Preschool Curriculum Framework. Behind it, so that's a 4-pager. Behind it is an article called Animals and Occupations, Why Theme-Based Curricula Work, and that's a 2-pager. I'd like you to just count off around your table, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, so you know which one you're going to read, and so we have at your discussion group people that have read both of them, each of them. No, it's okay. It's fine. Yeah. I probably do need it, but I think I have other ones. Anyway, so does everybody have a number? Does anybody not have a number? You need the materials or the number? Okay. Here you go. It's in here. So, you need one more? Okay. So, as I'm getting these materials, okay, thank you. Okay, you're going to have 5 minutes to read your selection, either 1 or 2, whichever one you got. I'll call time, and then we're going to have table discussions about what does creating an integrated curriculum in early education really mean? What does it mean to you? What's the teacher's role around creating that curriculum? And why is it so important? So that's what the discussion will be, just so you're clear as you get into reading it, where we're headed. So go ahead, enjoy the reading. So you have some sense of kind of the foundational thinking behind integrated thematic curriculum. Before we get into actually designing and what you take into consideration when you design it, I want to show you a video of just one classroom, and want you to think as you're looking at it about where and how does the theme show up across the different parts of the day and the kinds of movement of the kids throughout different centers, et cetera. How does the theme connect all of that, and how does it show up in those different ways? And what kind of planning do you think had to go on in advance for the teacher to pull that off? Right? So those are your 2 prompts. And let's go to this classroom.
Los pollitos en la granja hacen pío, 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 pío. Los pollitos en la granja hacen pío, 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 todo el día. Okay.
The SEAL curriculum is designed around how children learn. We design it around thematic units. The thematic units are meant to be things that we know interest children, things that we know are important for them to learn, where teachers have done some real thinking about, can this be made hands-on and tangible, and is it relevant to small children?
¿Listos para cantar a ordeñar? 1, 2, 3. A ordeñar. La vaca leche sacarás.
The theme in Roxana Peña's classroom is the farm. And you would think, well, yeah, kids are interested in the farm, why not? But there's a real deeper reason for this theme into why she chose the farm. She's trying to help them understand, which is what is in the Preschool Foundations as well, is that living things have characteristics, that they change through a life cycle, that there are products that result from things on farms that people can use, and so there's a cycle of use and natural resources. From the kids' point of view, they're learning about cows, and they're learning about sheep, and they're learning about pigs. But they're also learning so much deeper understandings about the natural world, about animals, and about habitats.
Dígame, Mauro. ¿Los pollitos viven? ¿A dónde?
En la granja. En la
granja, sí, pero salen de un huevo.
Gallinero.
En el gallinero, muy bien. Valeria va a repasar con nosotros el vocabulario que hemos aprendido todo este mes, ¿ok? Aquí, Valeria. Ojos a Valeria. Vamos, Valeria.
Mipa.
Mipa.
The day typically begins with the teacher bringing the whole classroom community together on the rug. It's a way they start the day together. They may start with some new vocabulary. She may start with introducing some new information through various kinds of visuals and other activities.
Había una vez 3 cochinitos que estaban felices y contentos jugando. Cuando llegó, rodeando, buscando qué comer, y vio a 3 cochinitos. A ellos les dio mucho miedo. Y sopló, y sopló, y sopló, y sopló. Nada pasó. Y salió corriendo, 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 corriendo. Y ya no supieron nada del lobo. ¿Ok? Muy bien, gracias.
After the whole group part that starts off the morning, children go off into organized small groups that are for planned activities where they get engaged in multiple kinds of things.
A ver, vamos a contar las patas. ¿Qué animal es eso?
1,
2,
3, 4.
¿Qué animal?
Vaca.
La vaca. ¿Dónde van a poner vaca? ¿En 4 patas o 2 patas? Aquí, póngala aquí. Aquí, perfecto.
There are center times where they're doing specific activities set up for small groups, where there's more chance for interaction, more chance for hands-on engagement.
1, 2, 3.
There's always some kind of math center, or what we think of as math. They're sorting or counting, but it's linked to the theme.
Vamos a mirar la vaca aquí.
¿Y la milpa qué nos da? ¿Qué nos da la milpa?
Tengo una pregunta.
Elote. La milpa nos da elote. La milpa nos da elote. ¿Quieres tocar el maíz?
La oveja. ¿Dónde va la oveja?
Ese es maíz.
Último cuadrito.
¿Cómo se llama? Maíz. A ver, ¿cómo se llama esto?
¿Puedes poner?
Maíz. A ver.
There's always some kind of center that is about really hands-on, tangible connection with what they've been hearing about.
Me va a decir algo de la oveja. Okay. ¿Qué me vas a decir de la oveja? Fíjate todo lo que hemos aprendido. Okay. La oveja. Dime una oración completa. Dime, la oveja.
A la oveja de la cola.
Ok. La oveja.
There's always some kind of center that involves early writing, so where they're dictating and drawing and seeing their words turn into print.
¿Y tú me dibujaste la colita? Ok, ahora vamos a poner tu nombre, Damián. Ok, lo vamos a poner aquí, Damián. Pero mira, vamos a poner acá, Damián.
And then observation pictures is another activity for small groups.
¿Quién quiere dibujar algo de este animal de la granja, de la gallina?
Yo quiero hacer la vaca.
Ok, ¿tú quieres hacer la vaca? Muy bien.
Yo quiero hacer los culeros.
¿Los cerditos? Muy bien. Mira acá. Aaron, dibujar un tractor. ¿Qué color quieres para dibujar tu tractor?
Quiero hacer rainbow.
After the small group activities, children are free to engage in whatever they want to engage in the classroom. And this is where a rich classroom environment, a thoughtful, intentional classroom environment becomes so important.
Manzana. ¿Y qué más come la vaquita? Fruta. ¿Le gusta la fruta? Qué rico come esa vaca que le gusta fruta. ¿Tú quieres ordeñar también?
Ordeñar, vamos a ordeñar.
¿Qué pasa con el lobo?
Estoy aquí.
Oh,
Mamá, tiene una carta. Vamos a
Jeremiah.
soplarlo.
¿Qué pasa con el lobo?
Mamá,
Pero
tiene
las
una carta.
casas, las casas.
Ya le comí.
Ahora tú.
Mira.
El elote sale rico. ¿Con qué te gusta el elote? A ver. Muy bien.
This is how young children learn. They learn through play. They learn through pursuing what is interesting to them, where their curiosities are, and where their personality takes them.
Un caballo.
¿Ese es un caballo? Mira este. ¿Cuál es este? Ese es el donde vas a poner el caballo. Muy bien. A recortar así la vaquita.
Children are involved also in creating the environment. And one of the ways they create the environment is through this thing called the living wall.
Vamos a ver, ¿dónde va a ir en la granja la gallina? Allí pusieron los gallos, hay un cerdito. ¿Dónde vas a poner el tuyo? Ok, póngalo allí. Vamos a ponerlo, pégalo. Con las dos manitas para que quede pegadito ahí en el sastre. Muy bien.
La vaca Lola tiene de mesa, tiene cola.
This is a bilingual classroom. The children come from homes in which Spanish is their family language. It's the language in which their knowledge of the world is being shaped. And so they come to school and they continue to want to learn in Spanish, in the language they know, while they're learning English.
Allí, perfecto. ¿Está mirando? ¿Qué está mirando el de este que hay adentro? Mira. Uy, ¿qué es eso? ¿Qué es eso?
Pájaro.
Un pájaro.
¿Ya de todo?
Mira, es una gallina. Ahí está la puerta.
Roxana's classroom is mostly done in Spanish, but she also includes English.
Okay, ready? Let's switch our channel to English. Okay? This story is going to be in English. I need your listening ears ready, okay? The title is The Little Red Hen. A little red hen once found some grains of wheat. She showed them to her friends, the cat, the pig, and the duck. Who will help me plant this wheat? Said the little red hen.
Having a bilingual program with intentional language support that's both developing their Spanish and their English and their knowledge of the world in those two languages results in the strongest overall later biliteracy and overall literacy.
I planted the wheat. I cut the wheat. I ground it into a flour for baking. I baked the bread, so I will eat it all by myself. And she did. Isn't this a great story?
Yes.
Children walk out of a thematic unit and out of a SEAL early childhood classroom with much deeper engagement and knowledge about the world. They've learned about something, and they've learned about it with a fair amount of depth and rigor. They have learned that there's language that can be used to describe the world and to describe it in great depth, that I have multiple ways to learn about something. They've developed early literacy skills and the tools for learning like graphic organizers, etc., that they can carry into later academic work.
1, 2, 3. Los pollitos dicen pío, 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 cuando tienen hambre, cuando tienen frío. La gallina busca el maíz y el trigo, les da la comida y les presta abrigo. Gracias por haber escuchado. Nuestro círculo ha terminado. ¿Ok? Gracias, gracias.
Okay, so at your tables, go ahead and talk about how you saw the theme show up across the day, what kind of planning had to connect those different things, and what kind of planning and how it showed up across. Sorry to cut off your conversations, but I want us to move on to how you actually design these now. Because you could see it's pretty comprehensive what goes into, right? And that was just one part of a theme across one part of the day. So in the SEAL approach, we figure about 5 to 7 themes in a year in a TK. And I say 5 to 7 because the nice thing about TK is you're not beholden to having to cover a whole range of standards, et cetera, et cetera. And so if kids get really, really into something, you can make that theme longer, right? You can just keep it going and add and embellish. And so, but figure about 5 to 7 themes a year is about what it ends up being. They end up ranging from 5 to 8 weeks each because that's the kind of depth it takes to really get into language, to really follow kids' interests, to really get into the kind of depth of knowledge that a theme really deserves if it's a good theme. And so some of the curriculum that we end up buying, like they have these little 2 and 3 week themes, and I'd say, forget it. You can't really get to the depth needed. So figure 5 to 8 weeks. And here's the criteria. And I'm going to actually put you to work doing it in a little bit. The first thing is you start by saying, what do I know really interests kids? And it's important to start there because a whole field of early childhood, there are a lot of people who believe it just an emergent curriculum. You just sort of see what kids are interested in and you follow it, right? But it's hard to plan ahead for that. Planning time is difficult. Assembling the materials, really doing the intentionality of planning that's needed to really get to the depth of language we want is really hard if you're just doing an emergent curriculum. So our way of dealing with that is we just start with the list of the things. What are the things that we know kids love to learn about? And you have enough experience to do that. So collaboratively, a group of teachers will brainstorm that list. That's the first thing. Then you look at that list and you think, okay, which are the things on here where it would be really easy for us in a way to assemble tangible, hand-on experiences related to it. There are materials that are good. There are a lot of books. There's a lot of things that can bring this one to life. So one of those things on the list may kind of fall off. It may be a neat topic, but it would take a lot to assemble what it's going to take. The next thing is relevance, which is, does it really matter that kids know about this? And I think that that's one of the things that we as adults need to take on because we're preparing kids for a world, right? And so we want to believe we're going to spend 5 to 8 weeks really immersing in them, that it's something that we think is important too. And is it meaty enough to really dig into? Is it interesting to the adults? And some people will say, well, why is that there? And I just say, because you're going to be spending 5 to 8 weeks of your life really, really immersed in this thing. Your excitement about a topic really carries over to kids. Right? So these are some of the criteria. I want you to look in your packet for where the thematic, the blank thematic planner really begins. So there's a page after the article. It says criterion process for defining a preschool team. That's what I just talked about. And below that it says thematic units yearly plan. But I want you to turn to the next page where it actually says thematic unit planner. And this is a blank one. Later on, we're going to look at a filled out one. But what I want you to see here is that at the very top, you're going to define the theme, and you're going to dig into some key concepts about why am I teaching this? What's really important that I want the kids to walk away with? And then we're going to look toward the preschool foundations and skills that we want to develop as part of it. I'm going to take you through all of these pieces. I just want you to see what's coming. We're going to define a key language function to focus in on as part of this unit. We're going to develop a planning grid for it, hone in on some key vocabulary, and then go from there, as you see when you turn the page, to the different learning environments and centers in a TK classroom, and really start thinking about, okay, now that I know all of this other stuff, how am I going to build it out in the life of the classroom? So that's what we're going to work our way through. But it really starts with the very, very top thing where it just says theme. And so what I want you to do at your table, might want to do it with the whole table or just with a few of you, take just a minute or two to brainstorm a list of possible thematic topics that you think, in your experience, you found kids love to learn about. So brainstorm that, and then select one that meets the criteria of this. Okay, I would like to hear what each table has, just a quick whip around. What did you guys select? So somebody randomly pick one, and the other people at the table can just support you. What? Animals. Animals. What did you guys pick? What did you pick? Fall, pumpkins, harvest, kind of, okay. What did you come up with? Plants. Community helpers. Ocean animals. Dinosaurs, okay. So now dinosaurs is an interesting thing, right? Because we know it totally, kids really get into it, right? There's a lot of stuff available on dinosaurs. It's relevant. It may not be so tangible, right? But we'll work on that. Is it meaty enough? Is there enough in there on dinosaurs to get into? You think yes, and the adults at your table are willing to take this on, right? Okay, so there's a one-page sheet. It's actually got things on both sides that we're going to actually have your table develop together. So pull that out. It's a separate sheet. Not everybody needs one. It's just going to be the record of what your table does. So the first thing is fill in on the top what your theme is. And a theme, because we want kids to really engage and be able to play and put themselves into it, one of the first things on a thematic planner underneath theme, it says create an identity for the unit, like we're entomologists learning all about insects, or we're marine biologists studying the ocean. I want you to come up with what's the role that you want your kids to get into being able to play and put on as studiers of this topic. So you guys, what? Paleontologists. All right, a table of we are paleontologists studying dinosaurs. Marine biologists. All right, farmers with the harvest in the fall. Community workers. We're just studying our community, or we're sociologists, or we're think about what? They can be city planners, studying our community and our community workers. And you guys on animals, you're going to be, okay, you could be zookeepers, we could be veterinarians, we could be life scientists, it doesn't matter. We want our kiddos to be able to feel like, whoa, we're going to be entomologists studying insects. Okay, so that's the next thing. Now, what becomes important before we go any deeper is you've sort of labeled what this is going to be about. But the next thing that happens is we need to layer on the preschool foundations now. Because there's been a lot of thought put into what young kids should be learning, right? And there's history and social studies and science on preschool foundations. So this is what it looks like. This is a group that had come up with planting. And some people wanted to do the farm specifically or et cetera. And so they looked at the preschool foundations, and they pulled out and cut up the preschool foundations they felt like they could really hit as part of this. And so the ones they came up with are things like changes in the earth, life cycles of plants, right? All of that can fit in there. So that's what they're going to include in it. And in the process of that, they kind of sub-labeled their their unit Changes in Living Things. That's just where they went. Later on, just as an aside, as they started seeing how it all started clustering, they realized that there was a preschool foundation actually kind of about community workers and occupations and stuff that didn't get in there, that they really wanted in there, but it would make too many units. And so they added jobs. They went back and they added jobs to all of them. So that's the next step, is to look to the preschool foundations to deepen our sense of what you're going to do in your units. So this is what we're going to do. In the middle of your table, you have just a little packet, not enough for everybody at this point because what I want is for you to work collaboratively. I want you to look in these and see which preschool foundations might you want to hit as part of your theme that you've now selected. So go ahead. There's enough for every couple people to have one and look together. You have a few minutes to do that. Okay, I'd like to move you to a slightly deeper place. Did everybody find some preschool foundations that seemed like a good match for you? The back two tables, did you find preschool foundations that seemed like a good match? Yeah, you found some? Did anybody find too many? Yeah, okay. So obviously you're not going to cover all of them. You're going to need to make, and that's why developing your yearly plan of themes first makes sense, so that you can decide, oh, but you know, this one also, it applies both to our oceans unit, and it'll apply to our dinosaur unit, and it'll apply to, and so which aspects are we going to take up when? That's why you want to get that yearly plan first. And in developing the yearly plan, part of what you're thinking about is you don't want to end up all with science ones. The entire year doing things about animals and science and have totally neglect some of the social studies ones, right? So looking across the year helps you do a couple things. It helps you hone in on which aspects of the preschool foundations you're going to cover where, how you're going to see to it that across the year there's some variety. You're going to want in the planning out of the yearly plan of themes to be thinking about times of year. I mean, people always love doing a plant, some kind of plant growing thing in the springtime, right? Or a harvest thing in the fall. Or, you know, there's some things that are marked for certain times of the year that'll anchor you. But your yearly plan of themes begins to sort it out. Right now, we're going to focus in on just one theme. And so the fact that you've got way too many preschool foundations at this point is not problematic, but you are going to need to narrow it down, right? So you're going to start by this big process across the year, and that's what this represented. They ended up with 7 across the year. Now, a real key part before we get deeper into the architecture is you have some sense of the topic, some sense of the preschool foundations. You want to define what we call enduring understandings, or really key concepts. And these are just like the big ideas you want to be really sure your kiddos walk away having from this unit. So it's not everything, it's just a few key things. Why does this matter? Why are you teaching this? What's the big thing, right? So I'm going to give you some examples. Here's from a preschool pets unit and the enduring understanding. We just want kids to understand pets have needs and what those are, shelter, care, food, and that people who have pets have to take care of them, and that they'll understand that pets and people can form close bonds that benefit both. That's why, at the deepest level, the teachers were feeling like we want to do a pets unit. Yeah, it's neat to learn about cats, and it's neat to learn about snakes and all those things, but this is the deep, enduring reason. Then the essential questions which are going to drive them are, what do pets need to survive and thrive? What can we do to help pets survive and live well? And why do people like? So these are the kinds of things you might pose to kids to think about and kind of be pursuing as you go through the unit. Another kind of example is from the garden unit, where children will understand plants and insects are found all around us. The insects are beneficial to the environment and to humans, and they have a life cycle, that both plants and insects have a life cycle. And those of you who are just reading the preschool foundations, that life cycle thing, living things change, is like right there, right? So that's what they were going for. And then their essential questions were, where can you find insects? How are they the same or different from other animals? And why are they important? That was kind of more what they wanted to drive the kids thinking about and wondering about. And how do they grow? So I want you to just spend a little bit of time at your table pursuing this notion of, really, if we're doing, why are we doing dinosaurs? What really matters to us that kids walk away from a dinosaur study understanding? So have a little of that conversation. Obviously, you're not going to get to the depth of final decisions or whatever, but I want you to experience what thinking about the unit that way does for you. So go ahead. I'm going to move you along. I know in a way it's frustrating because you're just beginning to get into this, but I want you to understand the steps rather than we're going to come out with finished units at this point. So does somebody have an example of just an enduring understanding why you want to be teaching what you're teaching and you want them to walk away with? Can we have one example from the room? Okay, paleontologists, go.
So our understanding is if we don't take care of our world today, we may lose more species.
If we don't take care of our world today, we may lose more species. So what you're going to be getting into about your dinosaurs is how they disappeared. Okay, that's huge. All right, let's go for it. So yeah, that's a really good enduring understanding. So, okay, let's move on. So let's say you've got some preschool foundations that are in the back of your head. You've got your big theme. You've got your enduring understandings. The next thing we're going to go to is we're going to have to define beyond that a little bit more about the skills and foundations you're going to actually teach. Something called language functions. What's the key literature that you want to be using? How every aspect of the environment in your classroom and even outside is going to be keyed to that theme and is going to build it. What's the key vocabulary you want your kids to have? What's going to go into the centers? And then for those of you that are in a dual language classroom, how you're going to allocate across the two languages. So let me just ask, how many of you are in dual language classrooms? Okay, all right. So here we go. Got to keep moving. So here's the year-long plan. This is what it looks like. You've got it in your handout. And we've already kind of dealt with, you're going to have the names of these. You're going to have key concepts for each. You're going to have preschool foundations spread across the year. You might decide to have some kindergarten standards you begin to work with, and that's why I left it on your table. We can come back to that. And then there's this crucial architectural column, architectural for the unit, called language functions. So what is that about? Let me take a little bit of time to help you understand. This is about, in this unit, there's some big cognitive analytic thing we want kids to grapple with, right? For you guys, it may end up being sequence and time, right? But these are the key language and cognitive functions for 4-year-olds. Description, and really being able to describe things, comparing and contrasting, sequence and time, quantification and categorization. So you have to figure out, looking at the preschool foundations, thinking about your topic, what is the major language function for this theme? Across the year, you're going to want to hit all of the language functions, but you're only going to have to work right now on one theme. So here's what we mean. Here's an example. If you were working with this preschool foundation on properties and characteristics of non-living things, demonstrate the ability to observe and describe the characteristics and physical properties of objects, which language function is that? Description. It's right there. Hey, they make it so easy for us. These kids are going to have to describe and talk about the characteristics, right? Here's another one. Sense of place, navigating familiar locations, preschool foundation. Which do you think this might be? Compare and contrast. It's right there. In order to compare and contrast, you have to describe. So one thing that you might want to do is do a description unit earlier in the year before you get to a compare and contrast unit, right? But you're going to need to decide which language function you're just going to go for in this unit, because that's going to guide your modeling of the language, your use of the language, a lot of the ways in which you're going to shape this, this unit. For example, if your animals unit is going to end up being a compare and contrast, that means you need multiple animals, right? And you want them to be different from each other in some key ways, so comparing and contrasting gets really easy. If they're all exactly the same in some ways, it's not going to do it for you. But so you're going to need to figure out the language function. And then along with that language function comes a set of graphic organizers, because that visually represents this cognitive task. This is what helps kids that don't yet have the language to put into it, and it helps kids working across two languages because the visual representation is the same. So what does that mean? Here we go. Description. Anytime you're saying, tell me about it, or what does it look like, or describe it, or what are its characteristics, there's a vocabulary kids need, right? This looks like, this acts like, this is, this can. There's a more sophisticated vocabulary for description. What are its characteristics? What are its qualities? We want you using that language. We want the kids using that language. And what you're really getting into is how you put together description, what adjectives you need to describe all of that. So there it is in the DRDP. We want kids using increasingly complex words and sentences to communicate ideas and describe. We want kids having that kind of language. In the foundations, describing characters, describing and summarizing information, matching descriptions of work with what people do with the names of related jobs. So you can look at what you've sort of got and say, is this a description unit I'm really working on? In which case, those are the skills I'm going for, and these are the graphic organizers I'm going to build into my unit. So a web, great for description. We're describing animals on the farm, the different animals on the farm, the different products that they all have. This was from Roxana's classroom where you saw the video. Or a tree map. We're doing community workers, and we want them to be able to describe what these workers do and what their tools and equipment are and how they really help. And so a tree map, veterinarians help these animals using these tools. They can do this. What this does for kids is it organizes the information and helps you focus the language in the unit. So I'm going to give you a couple other examples and then ask you to think about, for the unit you've chosen, which of those language functions is going to become part of the basic architecture for that unit. So compare and contrast. How are these the same or different? Which do you like best and why? Same, difference, similarities, differences, whereas, however, as opposed to. This is all the language of compare and contrast. And the graphic organizers are the Venn diagram, right? Or two hula hoops, if you want to do it actually with manipulatives. Comparing the ladybug and the bee. What's the same? What's similar? What's unique? What's different? As kids do their sorting and talking. And the language you would be using would be this and this, or both have this, or they're different because, whereas this has this, that has that. That's the language you're developing. Time and sequence. Tell me about what happened. How do you do it? Tell me a story. What happened next? And all of this incredible language. And so what kinds of topics might be sequence or time flow types of topics? Planting a seed, yeah. Yeah, so you guys are doing a unit on harvest. Yeah. Yeah. So you might want to make it a sequence unit. This is my point. You have to choose for your unit which language function you're going to go with. And the graphic organizers then you'd end up using, here, changes in living things, sense of time, a flow chart. Which came first, what happened next, that kind of thing. Or the round arrows showing cycles. Or laying it out this way like a flow chart. Or timeline. So for the paleontologist group, probably sequence is going to be a big one. Or maybe, well, anyway. Sorting and classifying is the last one. And so anytime you're trying to figure out categories, same and different. The split oval, where kids can actually manipulate and talk about how are these, which goes where, which things belong together. And there it is again. This is of all that we're studying the ocean, of all the things on the ocean, which are the living things and which are not the living things, right? Here's a T graph. So the notion of language functions is really, really, really essential because you need to work them over and over and over again, and you need to apply them in multiple ways across the life of a unit. And by the end of it, your kiddos are going to totally be able to do compare and contrast. They're going to be comparing and contrasting everything, having incredible language for doing it. And, oh, gee, they really did learn about the difference between animals and human beings, and the ways they're the same and the way that they're different as living beings for you guys. So what I want you to do is pretend that your unit now is one of them in a yearly plan, and decide which language function fits for your topic. I hope I haven't confused you too hopelessly, but you're now in the situation of realizing that this particular topic, we could go different directions with it. And it might depend on when in the year we're doing it. Starting with description, if we're doing community workers at the beginning of the year, we're going for description. They're describing their community, blah, blah, blah. If we're doing it later in the year and we've already done description, maybe we want to do more of a compare and contrast. The difference between a firefighter and a police person and a cashier, you know, they help us in different ways. They have different equipment. That's more of a compare and contrast. Or they were talking about plants. Again, is it just describing plants and what plants need, and they all need water and soil, et cetera, and they all have you know, roots and et cetera, so maybe that is description. Or maybe it's that maybe they want to go with sequence and really how plants develop and life cycle. So you can't know that unless you're developing your yearly plan of themes. But before you plan a unit, you have to have decided which one it's going to be. So that's why I'm going to short circuit that. We don't have time to do a yearly plan of themes, but I want you to see what it would look like. So just select one for right now, one language function. That would be the step that you would take. Now the next step is where we go in deeper, and it's where we develop the planning grid. You're doing animals, you're doing dinosaurs, you're doing plants, you're doing community workers. Which community workers, which plants, which dinosaurs, right? Don't want to throw them all out. We want to be intentional about what we're doing. So if you turn over your planning sheet for a minute, we're going to talk about the planning grid, which is how you actually organize it. This is a tool for you. There are some situations where in a classroom you might actually use this kind of grid, but really it's for you to begin with. The headings across, the headings for the columns come primarily from the Preschool Foundations or those key concepts. The rows are the examples. So the columns would be things like habitat, diet, blah, blah, blah. The rows would be, we're going to compare all of those things against these different ocean animals of the octopus and the shark and the, right? So let me give you some examples. This one is teaching about forest animals, and they decided this is a description unit, and so they wanted to have kids talk about the features and characteristics of each. They want to understand that animals have different features, that they have different habitats, that they have different diets, and they have different predators, right? So then when they had to come up, well, which animals are we going to teach about? They didn't want to come up with animals that all have the exact same habitat and diet, because then the kids aren't really understanding these concepts. They need some contrast. So they said, well, let's do something, a bird of some kind that flies. We'll do a furry animal, and we'll do, they came up with these because these have different enough features, different enough habitats, different enough diets, and different enough predators. So you have to begin by understanding what are those big concepts before you can decide we're going to do the firemen and we're going to do the policemen and we're going to do the cashier. First, you have to decide your columns. Does this make sense to you? Okay. So here's transportation, same kind of thing. This is where features, where does it go, the driver and tools and equipment, and the interesting facts. Interesting facts is always a really nice one to have when you're putting this together. And so they wanted to pick types of transportation that go on different kinds of what do you call it? Yeah, thank you. So one of them flies in the sky, the other goes on water, the other goes on land. That's how they started by deciding. Now they could have had something else that goes on land. They could have had a truck. They could have had something else that goes on water. They could have made it a ferry boat or something like that instead of a sailboat. They could have had something else that goes in the sky. They could have made it a helicopter. And it still could have fulfilled the function. So first you have to decide on these columns. Then the fun is you just get to decide within those categories which are the things we would really have fun teaching about and we think kids would really love, right? You do not start by saying we want to do a unit on the polar bear and on the penguin, because that doesn't help develop these key concepts. Okay, where are we now? So at your tables, Think about your unit. Think about your key columns for your unit. You may want to look back at the Preschool Foundations. Think about your language function. And try to come up with just a really rough draft of what your columns would be and some ideas of what your rows might be. Okay? Okay, my friends. You're getting a picture of what it takes and the steps to go through. The next parts end up getting really into strategies, except what you would do next if you look at the blank thematic planner again that's in your handout, you'll see, oh gee, after we've done our planning grid, we define some key vocabulary, and that vocabulary is both content-specific vocabulary, like fur and feathers and scales, and it's language function vocabulary, like same, different, comparison, similarities, right? Because those can apply to any kind of compare and contrast. So you fill in your vocabulary. That's the next thing. What words, what vocabulary do I really want kids to be able to use for this? And then you get to go to thinking about each of your centers in the way that you saw represented in the movie. And think about, okay, well, what would our dramatic play be? Here we are, we're paleontologists. Oh boy, we get to do some digging and bones and et cetera, et cetera. What would be happening in the art center? What would I want to have in the blocks manipulatives? What would I want to have, going on in my math center? That's where you get to do that creative fun that gets you into both strategies and really thinking through. Because you now know what you're teaching about and what those key concepts are you're trying to get to. You also will identify what's the key literature, what are some key books that I want to use for dialogics, for interaction, that'll get to these key concepts and fill out their understanding of these animals, dinosaurs, community workers, etc. We're not going to do that work here. A, we only have 15 more minutes, and B, that it's sort of like you've got the basic architecture already. What you need to do then would be to take it to that next level. What I want to be able to do is to give you a few minutes to look at. On your table, I have several different examples of actual filled-in thematic planners. There's not enough for everybody to have one of each one, but you've got insects, you've got oceans, I want everybody to be able to look at one of them, whether it's the oceans or the insects, so you can see what does a completed thematic planner actually look like. So find those in your table. Take a minute or two to look at them. Okay, so you have a model of what a filled-in one looks like. Obviously, then, there's a lot of other creative additional stuff that goes into delivering a unit, but this is the architecture. This is the basic thinking for a 5 to 8 week unit. So I would like to close by showing you one more video. Maybe it's just nailing it too much to send home. And then I will be here to answer questions afterwards. Is that okay? You up for one more video? Okay.
La mariquita es roja con puntos negros y cuando vuela, tiene que alzar sus élitros.
The preschool class that we see today is an illustration of the way in which the environment, a rich environment, engages children in deep, deep learning, and that becomes the lab through which they not only are learning about the world, but are developing language.
¿Qué pasa cuando le ponen el agua con sal encima al hielo? ¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué está pasando?
Se deshace.
Se está derritiendo muy bien. ¿Y qué hay ahí adentro? ¿Ya descubrieron qué hay adentro?
Animales.
Ah, vamos a poner el agua aquí. Mira, papi, ponla aquí. ¡Oh! ¡Miren! Vente. ¿Qué encontraste? ¿Qué es? ¡Un grillo!
So this class is deep in an insects unit. Thematic units are really important because it gives extended time to really be immersed in a topic. So what we see today is a point in their thematic unit where they already have learned all about the characteristics of the ladybug, and they've drawn pictures of them and seen photographs and read books about them. And they go outside, and they have ladybugs that are going to be released into the garden.
¿Qué son? ¿Qué son? ¿Qué creen que hay aquí? ¿Qué creen?
¿Qué piensan que hay ahí?
¿Qué son?
¿Qué piensan que es?
¡Ay, mariquitas! Ok, vamos a colocar las mariquitas. A ver, miren, ya nos quedan aquí unas. Vamos a terminar. ¡Ay! Miren, ¿qué van a comer aquí? ¿Qué van a comer en el jardín? ¡Ay, miren, aquí hay muchas! Mira, ¿quieres tocar una? A ver. ¿Cuántas patas tienen las mariquitas? 6 patas.
Mira, está en su mano y ese tiene puntos negros. Mira cómo los está abriendo. ¿Qué está abriendo para volar? Sus élitros. Vamos a observar.
Mira, levantó sus élitros.
¡Está en su carro! ¡Ahí está!
This class is a bilingual classroom. It is in Spanish, taught in Spanish, which is the language of the children from their home, and it's the language of the teachers as well. When children are taught in their strongest language, they can work at their peak of their academic ability. They are also learning English, but most of the instruction is happening and most of the learning is happening in and through Spanish.
Oye, hormiguita. ¿De qué creen que se trata esta historia de Oye, hormiguita?
De la hormiga que quería patear, el niño quería patear la hormiga.
Oh, bueno, vamos a ver.
Le dijo que no.
Ah, bueno, entonces vamos a mirar a ver por qué.
For children to learn language, they need to use language. They need to be producing language, doing the job of actually having it come out of their mouth. It's not enough to just hear it and receive it. So a really key activity for a classroom that is language-centric is to create a lot of opportunities where children are using language. For example, the think, pair, share. Turn to your partner. Share with them what you've just learned. Share with them what we're talking about.
Ok, se van a voltear un momentico con su compañero y le van a decir qué fue lo que más les gustó de la historia. A ver, Virginia, volteate con Angeli y le vas a decir lo que más me gustó de la historia fue.
Me gustó que también el niño...
¿A ti qué te gustó?
Quería plantar y el hormiga y el niño pequeño. La hormiga.
Y tú dile, a mí lo que más me gustó de la historia fue la hormiga, dile.
La parte cuando
La historia fue la hormiga. Ok, características. Rasgos especiales. Muy bien.
The human brain of young children is just wired to develop language. And language develops not by sitting down and learning a list of vocabulary words. It develops through the process of labeling your world, of labeling your experiences, of learning how it is to communicate. So here are children studying insects, and they want to know, what's this thing called? And how does it fly? And so the vocabulary about the wings and the vocabulary about the thorax and the characteristics of the insect become a way for them to bolster their own learning, but it's also how they're learning language.
La mariquita es roja con puntos negros y cuando vuela tiene que alzar sus élitros.
This is one of those areas where there's an absolute match between what's best for children and what we need as a world. Young children need fresh air. They need contact with nature. They need that sense of awe and wonder. They need that lab of natural things to learn from. Our early childhood programs need to be places where young children have a connection to nature, build that sense of connection, and build that sense of love and engagement with the natural world. Okay. It's 2:55. There's another 5 minutes on the indoor environment, and I can't show it to you now because we're done. But I wanted you to at least see how those different kinds of, when you think about that learning environment, that last bit of what you're going to fill in here, to really think through how the theme can have a life there, how the vocabulary has a life there, how she used characteristics just in the process of transitions, because she knew what the architecture of that unit was, a description unit. She knew where they were going about comparing. It was a compare and contrast and description unit comparing honeybees and ladybugs. And so she was setting up issues of habitat, issues of diet, issues of characteristics, et cetera, to do that compare and contrast. So that's the fun. That's the wonder of it, once you know what your unit is really trying to do. And I hope this workshop has helped you see how to do that. So thank you. Thanks. You have links to the videos written in your handout. If you don't do online feedback forms, please fill these out. The hard copies, you can come get them. And if anybody needs me to sign something or wants to ask questions, come on up. Thanks.